We've got almost 1 million young people now out of work, and we have to find ways to really tackle that. The improvements that have been made to careers education over recent years have resulted in about £300 million worth of savings.
How can schools prepare pupils for a workplace they're not sure what it's going to look like even in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years?
In many ways, the only guarantee is of further change. The answer is doubling down on those essential skills. It's going even further into them.
There's a government ambition for pupils to do 2 weeks by the time they reach year 11, but if only 7% are actually achieving that, does it feel like that target is realistic?
It reminds me of the JFK quote when America was preparing for the moon landings, and he said, "We don't do it because it's easy, we do it because it's hard." The more exposure that we can give to young people, because the future of work is not necessarily going to be so defined in terms of places and sectors because of ultimately of digital disruption and transformation, early prevention and actually preventing young people moving into becoming NEET is far better than cure in my mind, and that involves starting early.
What are some of the early warning signs that you think schools can look out for and interventions they can put in place if they spot that within a pupil in their classroom or in their school system? Welcome to Trust Matters Lessons in Leadership. In this episode, we're joined by John Yarham, CEO of the Careers and Enterprise Company, the national organisation working to help every young person access high-quality careers education, employer experiences, and pathways into future employment. John has spent more than 25 years working across education, skills, and careers. And in this conversation, we explore one of the biggest challenges facing schools right now: how we prepare young people for a future that feels increasingly uncertain. We discuss the changing landscape of work experience, why the traditional placement model is becoming harder to do, and what new approaches could look like in practice. John also shares insight into the work being done to prevent young people from becoming NEET, including how schools can identify risk earlier and the strategies that are making the biggest difference. A major theme throughout the episode is equity, from the barriers faced by SEND students and those in alternative provision, to the growing gap in access to meaningful work experience and employer networks. We also talk about skills, confidence, AI, and the future of work, and what schools should be prioritising when many of the jobs that young people will eventually do don't even exist yet. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. So, firstly, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, John. It's a pleasure to have you with us. You spent the first 25 years of your career working in education and skills. What have you learned that's got you up to this point now of being the CEO of the Careers and Enterprise Company?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me on the podcast. Really excited to be here. And yeah, just looking back, I suppose my motivation for moving into education broadly and careers specifically, I've spent a long time in sort of careers education, as partly prompted from where I grew up and the sort of circumstances. I grew up in a really remote part of Norfolk. My primary school, there were 4 other kids in my year. My dad was self-employed. My mum was a teacher, and I did pretty well at school. I kind of went through an academic route, but had very limited exposure to the world of work, if I'm honest. And partly that was because there were not that many businesses around where I grew up. But then that kind of led, so I went through to university and then ended up applying for lots and lots of jobs. I think I counted about 250 different jobs, but just really did not have a good grounding in terms of knowing what to look for, how to apply for things, what the skills I'd developed were, even though I'd had various part-time jobs, etc. And it was quite a long time, and going through unemployment, working in factories, working in all sorts of different jobs before I kind of found things that I started to enjoy. And I just felt that, combined with my long-standing view that education really is the thing that really breaks down systemic barriers. And those two things combined made me think we could do this better. We can prepare young people for their futures in a better way, so that not just people like me, but all sorts of different young people from all sorts of backgrounds can get better futures and really make the most of their potential. Everyone has so much potential. How can we unlock that? It just feels like such an important challenge to me.
And when were you in that classroom with 4 other pupils, what were your dreams when you were thinking about a career?
So going right back, the where I was growing up, farming was quite a big thing. So I did want to be a farmer. Then I was quite into sport, but realised quite early on I probably wasn't going to quite make it, quite good enough to make it. I was quite good at English. I was thinking about becoming a sports journalist and those kind of things. But I sort of felt like, I suppose, possibilities started to narrow. And that's why we're particularly interested in sort of starting really early in terms of careers education and making sure that young people, yes, have some realistic ambitions, but that those ambitions are as broad as possible. And I think that's not what necessarily happened for me.
And for those who might not be familiar with the Careers and Enterprise Company, could you explain a bit about the company, what it does, and what your focus is at the moment in the education sector?
Yeah, so we've been around for 10 years. We're the national body for careers education. We have a very strong link through to the Department for Education, but we are independent, and that allows us to also, as well as having the kind of clarity of government policy and taking our steer from that, it allows us to really engage with employers as well. So our work is to improve the quality of careers education that young people in schools and colleges across England receive. And we do that through supporting careers leaders in schools and colleges through a range of resources, training, support. But we also have place-based partnerships as well across every part of England. So they're called careers hubs, so that combine those schools, colleges with employers at scale. So we have about 4,000 business volunteers. We've got lots of employers engaged in different programs such as work experience, which is the current kind of real focus for us.
And you mentioned work experience, and recent Teacher Tapp data shows that only 7% of schools are offering a 2-week work experience placement, with most only doing 1 week. There's a government ambition for pupils to do 2 weeks by the time they reach year 11, but if only 7% are actually achieving that, does it feel like that target is realistic? And what needs to change if it is going to be achievable for most schools?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and it reminds me of the JFK quote, which is when America was preparing for the moon landings, and he said, "We don't do it because it's easy; we do it because it's hard." And I think that resonates for me with challenges like this. It's not easy. It's not. We're trying to firstly increase the amount of activity that young people have, but we're also really importantly trying to increase the quality that they have of their exposure to employers and to the world of work. That's really important because we know that young people can't be what they can't see. And when I was speaking about my own experiences, or lots of other young people when they were growing up, we know that unless they have that understanding of the possibilities that are out there, if they don't have that inspiration, then they find that more difficult to make that transition. So it's a really important challenge, and just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't be setting a high bar for that. And that's why I think, yes, we're starting where we are, but we've got a real ambition and a determination over the next few years to significantly increase the amount of exposure young people have to employers, but also increase the quality as well.
And if schools are struggling to get to that 2-week point, what would your advice be? And what are some of the pilots or models that you've seen working that manages to incorporate it maybe throughout year 7 to 11 instead of having like that single week placement?
Yeah, so you've touched on a really important aspect of our reimagination, if you like, of work experience. So it's something that's existed for quite a long time in a certain way, which is generally a week or fortnight block placement, a single placement, sort of high stakes almost in that sense. So we've reimagined that to think about it in a way that builds up those experiences over the whole of a young person's school career, and that starts in Key Stage 3. It may start with in groups. It may start with multiple experiences of quite a short amount of time. It may involve some degree of virtual as well in terms of learning and engaging with employers in different ways. And then over that time, they start to really build up to then ultimately, if a student is showing interest in a particular area, they have the opportunity to engage in a placement later on in Key Stage 4 in that way. So it depends on the school, it depends on the curriculum, but there's a real opportunity to build it increasingly into lessons, into other aspects of the curriculum, rather than seeing it as a standalone, bolt-on exercise that actually requires quite a significant amount of administration and burden on the school. It's how we can build it in early. And we've seen some of that practice really developing in some of the MATs that have engaged in our pilots, as well as some of the areas that are supporting that as well.
Have you found that's more impactful for the pupil as well, that they seem to be more engaged by the time they get to the point of potentially doing a week's placement?
Completely. And ultimately, that redesign is, yes, it has benefits for the school. Yes, it certainly has benefits for the employer in terms of not having having to have that kind of single high stakes sort of week or fortnight. But ultimately, it really is for the benefit of the student or the pupil, and that's because they've started to gain experiences with employers, experiences of working in different environments in a way that is ultimately building them up to being more confident and being clear about the direction that they want to go in.
And a big part of your work is preventing young people from becoming NEET when they leave education. What are some of the early warning signs that you think schools can look out for, and interventions they can put in place if they spot that within a pupil in their classroom or in their school system?
Yeah, and you're absolutely right to highlight the challenge I think we face as a country, really, and as a society around NEET. We've got almost 1 million young people now out of work, and we have to find ways to really tackle that. And that's not there's no single solution. I think everyone knows there's no single solution that's going to do that. But early prevention and actually preventing young people moving into becoming NEET is far better than cure, in my mind. And that involves starting early. It involves being able to target and support young people at most at risk of becoming NEET in the way that you describe. I think there are all sorts of characteristics, whether it's attendance, behaviour, some of the kind of characteristics we know are well evidenced now in terms of leading and resulting in young people being more likely to become NEET, including attainment, and particularly in English and maths as well, as was one kind of key characteristic of that. So we've got a really clear sense of what those characteristics are. It's how we support the prioritisation of those students that I think is important. And that's why, as part of the careers education programme, we are particularly focused on supporting careers leaders to identify really clearly who those students are. So we provide careers leaders now through a risk of NEET indicator that they've got direct access to. They can see the students within their cohorts that are most at risk, and they can see at a glance the amount of careers education that those students are receiving. So that's designed with the view that, firstly, those careers leaders can then make sure that those students are the correct ones. They can add their own kind of context from their own school, but they can also really start to prioritise the support that those students receive.
And you've worked with schools who have achieved 0% NEET. What are some of the things that they've done differently, that good practice that some people listening might be able to pick up advice and tips from?
Yeah, so it's a great question as well. So I did some research just before Christmas, actually looking at the schools that combined the sort of lowest levels of NEET with some of the highest levels of deprivation, which would be a standard kind of way that you would expect young people to be measured in terms of their propensity for becoming NEET later on. And there were some really interesting schools that came through that. And one that springs to my mind is Huntcliffe School in Tees Valley in the northeast, which has really worked hard over a number of years to identify those students most at risk and provide them with quite a tailored approach of careers education that builds on their interests, builds on their needs, enables them to link with employers quite early on and build their confidence in working with those employers. And we can see the direct results of that in terms of their NEET figures that they are undoubtedly very proud of and understandably very proud of, because they're incredibly low. When if they hadn't done those interventions, they wouldn't be. We know that at a national level as well, in the sense of being able to clearly understand the number of students that go on to successful transitions directly as a result of great careers education. We can see that now really clearly.
And I think it's harder to access that meaningful work experience for pupils with SEND or perhaps pupils in alternative provision. What do you think needs to be done to address those gaps? And is there any good practice or case studies or ideas that you've seen that really works with those sets of pupils?
Again, two really important aspects to this. I think in terms of SEND, I'm sure all of the viewers or listeners to this podcast will know about the broader issues with SEND that we are tackling as a country and really needing to get to grips with in terms of that growth and complexity and the range of different circumstances that young people are facing, families are facing, and schools and colleges are facing as well. So it is a complex issue, but that's one that we are leaning into in terms of the work on careers education. So we've just recently signed a partnership with the British Association of Supported Employment to really look at constructing a group of employers that are keen to lean in, and when we're supporting those employers to do even more and build that base even further. I think some of the issues there is actually employer confidence in terms of engaging with special needs, because it feels off-putting for some reason. So the more we can break that barrier down, the better. With alternative provision, another important group, a critical group that we know has a very strong correlation to NEET, young people. And that's, again, where we're just about to launch a new programme of increased work experience, enhanced work experience, supporting alternative provision settings across England in that way.
And what might that look like, the enhanced work experience?
So it will look like a real involvement of brokerage with employers. It will involve building connections between those alternative provision providers in areas and key employers that are looking to support and make the difference in their communities. We'll have those careers hubs that I mentioned earlier playing a really strong role in making sure that those connections exist, so young people in alternative provision settings can get early support and that they can continue to build up a range of experiences over time. We've seen that already working in practice. So you mentioned sort of great case studies. I came across one just yesterday, actually, where there was a student in a setting who had got attendance that was almost off the scale in terms of just not being motivated by school. He was based in Staffordshire. He'd gone into one of the kind of provisions that we've put on for enhanced work experience, and he's now gone up to above 90% attendance just really quickly, in terms of it providing a huge motivation for him to engage, because he's now talking about himself being future ready, which is the name of the fund that we've been using to support that particular program. But it's really kind of captured his imagination, and he's actively changed his whole approach to school as a result of that.
That's so lovely to hear that it works in practice like that. And I guess the other side of that, like, that's an amazing example of what happens when you get it right and when this is done really well. What do you think the consequences are for those pupils and for society at large if we don't get this right in getting it done in the earlier part of school, or they don't get the time and work experience? What are the consequences for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're both. My starting point is generally the individual, is the society, and the kind of the direct impact on them. And I think we can see that in those kind of case studies. We can see the negative impact of young people that we perhaps all know or recognise that have failed to find the motivation, failed to find that ability to connect between education and their future, and just don't feel able to carve out a a future in work ultimately as a result of that. So for me, there's always the sort of starting point of those kind of situations, and seeing the lack of, the lack of ability to make the most of everyone's potential. But as a society and an economy, we know that it's also important. We know that the improvements that have been made to careers education over recent years have resulted in about £300 million worth of savings to the Treasury in terms of the difference that they have made in young people making positive transitions. And that's despite the challenge we face as a country in terms of NEET. So if we were to further expand that saving would be even greater. So there's an economic impact on this, of this situation, as well as a societal one and an individual perspective as well.
And as well as looking at careers as a whole, one of the things that you really focus on is skills. And employers often speak about skills gap when, people are leaving school and coming into the workplace. What are some of those gaps that you most often hear about from employers when people are leaving school?
Yeah, I speak to a lot of employers, and almost without exception, they revert back to, when talking about skills, what I would call essential skills. Some people would call them soft skills, but I think that undermines actually their importance. Bearing in mind how many employers talk to me so frequently about problem solving, about communication, about team working, about the ability to think through things and solve things in different ways, having the initiative to do that. Those skills are developed over time. I don't think we can expect young people at 16 or even 18 to be fully rounded in terms of all of those skills. I'm still developing them now in my career, even now. But I think what we can expect is for young people to be more aware of them, to be more deliberate in terms of how they learn and how they're supported in terms of developing those skills, how they can articulate them to employers in terms of what they've learned, but what they need to further develop, and how those employers can support them to do that. And careers education more broadly, but work experience specifically, I think, enables young people to bring some of those skills to the fore. It enables them to reflect on how they have developed those skills, but also where they want to go next.
And I imagine there's a big piece around confidence. What do employers tell you about the confidence of young people when they're entering the workplace? Has that dipped since COVID, where we've seen the same issues around attendance and behaviour? Has that seemed to have slipped at the same time as some of the other issues that are happening in education?
I think there's a lot of context to factor in. I mean, people are talking about currently about the sort of the death of the Saturday job, which isn't completely true, but undeniably there are sort of challenges in certain parts of the economy that traditionally young people have gone into in a part-time manner. That said, there's also, I see a lot of young people increasingly engaging in what you'd call side hustles. So the kind of notion of them becoming more entrepreneurial and more enterprising in different ways is also growing. We've got the situation around the threat, if you like, or opportunity of AI emerging as well. So there's a broader context. I think it's too simplistic to kind of point it just at one factor. Confidence is a really important aspect, and I think when we look at the best programs that take place in terms of careers education, with the best schools that are engaged in this work, and there are so many of them across different parts of England, we see the confidence of their students really growing. We see the ability that they have developed over time to move from a situation where they're looking down and worried about the reaction that an adult, particularly an employer, may have, to one where they start to feel their self-worth, and they start to understand how they can relate to that person that may seem initially unrelatable.
And you mentioned AI as a part of that. And I think there's a lot of anxiety at the moment around what does the future of the workplace even look like? I mean, it's changing so rapidly. Even in the last year, we've seen mass redundancies at a lot of companies that are replaced with AI chatbots in customer service and things like that. And How can schools prepare pupils for a workplace they're not sure what it's going to look like even in 5 years' time, let alone 10 years?
I think it's such a critical question, and for me, there's the answer is doubling down on those essential skills. It's going even further into them. I think, there's so much research and the situation is changing so rapidly. In many ways, the only guarantee is of further change. So much of that evidence base comes back to the importance of continued learning and the continued learning that we will all need to engage in throughout our careers, our journeys through education and work, and those careers will look also very differently. They'll involve lots of different jobs, but that ability and desire to continue to learn, I think, ultimately rests on those essential skills that are founded at an early stage in education, and that's why I think they are so critical.
And you mentioned about the high street and like Saturday jobs. And I do think that's something I hear a lot about, pupils leaving school. And we all know what the high street looks like in most towns now, quite empty. So when you're speaking to employers, what are some of those jobs that, a 16-year-old can do part-time, or when they're 18, there's a lack of graduate jobs now? What are some of those areas where you think there is growth in the job market?
Yeah, I mean, and it is changing constantly. There are, despite lots of the current noise around hospitality, there are still hospitality jobs. I mean, that's a given. I mean, in terms of different parts of the high street, as you say, are affected, but there are also opportunities as well, and that's where, for me, I'm really interested in enterprise. We have enterprise as part of our name, and that was deliberately there because of the desire to see young people really embracing kind of the notion of enterprising skills as part of all sorts of different jobs, and that they'll be, I think they will be required regardless of whether it's in a sector that's currently facing the challenges that hospitality or retail may be in terms of high street presence, or whether it's kind of how they start to transform into different areas, and that's where in terms of young people that I engage with, particularly through our youth advisory group, they talk to me about their experiences and their friends' experiences of working in a different way, and sort of seeing those kind of side hustle enterprises as part of that. I think there'll be more of that in the future, and I think we have a duty to really support and unlock some of that.
And when you're speaking with pupils, like what are they most excited about when it comes to the future of work? What are some of those jobs that they're talking about, they're aspiring to?
So we talk to lots and lots of individuals. I get the sort of lucky opportunity to visit lots of schools and colleges and directly talk to students and pupils there. But we also have quite a significant survey to understand that at scale. So that's last year, we're about 1/3 young people completed what we call our Future Skills Questionnaire. This year, it's going to look something like 500,000 young people. So it gives us real insight into their interests in the world of work. And it throws up some sort of fascinating differences and insights. So young people in the Northeast compared to young people in London being more interested in manual work and in different sectors. In London, more interested in professional services. Now, you might say that that's kind of a given, but I think there's just a strong correlation with the experiences that those young people are receiving, just in the same way that I spoke about being a farmer, because that's the only job I saw when I was growing up. So the more exposure that we can give to young people, because the future of work is not necessarily going to be so defined in terms of places and sectors because of ultimately of digital disruption and transformation, I think the better. And that's why I want to give every young person across all of England, in every different remote part and every different city and town and village across the country, that rich range of experiences, so they can see what's available to them.
And when you're looking at the employer side of this, what is the experience like for an employer? Like if someone's listening to this now and they might run a small business or they do something locally to a school, how can they get involved with offering those sort of placements to the pupils in their local area?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the kind of question of small businesses, because we know that so much of the economy is made up of small businesses, and that's the case in every part of the country pretty much. So the way that we have redesigned work experience for the future is very much plays into that situation and the ability for all employers, regardless of size, to make a contribution to young people's futures. We know employers want to do that. It's finding a way as to how they can do that. So if they can offer an hour, if they can offer a period of time that isn't necessarily a big block placement where they have to design a whole program, they can, and that's part of the future situation that we're really looking to increasingly make available to all students, all schools, but engage a broader range of employers, including SMEs, in that.
And it's interesting when you speak about your experience in Norfolk. How important do you think it is? And I mean, it's difficult for a young person to travel that far, but to see, you spoke about the virtual
Mm.
placements and speaking to different employers. How important is that to look outside of the area that you're currently living in?
I think there's always there is a context to where you grow up, and that's how local employers are part of our careers hubs. We have 44 careers hubs across the country. Each one of those has a group of 10 or so what we call cornerstone employers that are that are significant businesses in their area, and sometimes they're public sector, sometimes they're private sector, different organizations and they provide a place-based kind of context to the work. They engage other businesses in their area as well. So place is important. I don't want to show that place isn't important, but I think unlocking opportunities that go beyond that is also important, and that's where different experiences, some of which can be virtual, are also important. I think unlocking doors, and opening minds to future possibilities that may not exist in the area is an important aspect for all of us to prepare our young people.
And when you're doing the survey as well, I don't know if it's a part of it or not, but do you speak about how many pupils want to go to university as opposed to an apprenticeship, as opposed to straight into the workplace? Like, what does that balance currently look like?
Yeah, so we measure the awareness that young people have at different ages of the pathways available to them in their future, and we've seen, in particular, significant growth over recent years in young people understanding and being interested in apprenticeships as part of their future. And I think there's all sorts of reasons for that, but ultimately, it's good that they are aware of a broader range of routes and opportunities. There's more to go in terms of T levels, and obviously we've got V levels now coming in as well. So that situation isn't static; it's one that we need to continue to support and develop. But that it also there's the other side to that situation is the opportunities that are available to those students to take up that
Hmm.
interest, to not only explore it but actually follow their dreams. And
Yeah.
that's where, actually, for me, apprenticeships is an area where I'm really keen to see how the changes that I think the government are looking to make in terms of making them more focused on young people really takes off in the forthcoming years, because we know that there is a significant interest from young people in pursuing apprenticeships.
And what do you think, if you're a school leader listening to this podcast, what are some of the immediate steps? Well, maybe not immediate, can't put anything into place straight away, but if they're looking at the next academic year, what are some of the things that they could put in place to weave this more into the curriculum, more into the day-to-day timetable, some of those like practical things that they can start to do?
Yeah. So hopefully their careers leaders are already engaged in this work, and the Gatsby benchmarks have provided a real bedrock, a foundation for the work that's taken place over the last 10 years. Those Gatsby benchmarks have been revised recently in the last couple of years to push the bar even higher in terms of quality. And so careers leaders in schools and colleges across England are now really engaging with those. They're challenging. They are pushing quality even harder. We've got the concept of modern work experience that we're really promoting, that not just increasing the quantity, but also the quality of experiences that young people have. Fitting that into the overall strategic priorities of the school or the college is something that we see lots of schools really working hard at. And we are determined as the national body for careers education to support them with that. So we have something called the Careers Impact System, which there's an internal leadership review that we can support schools to undertake to show how careers maps against their broader priorities, shows how it fits within their leadership activity and the issues that they really want to tackle as an institution. And they can also go beyond that in terms of then reviewing it against other institutions. So we have a peer-to-peer review process as well, which is something that the schools and colleges that have engaged in that have found huge learning from. They can see how they can make things fit better within their institutions.
Do you think that's one of the biggest barriers to rolling this out further and having more quality and time is the time aspect of it? People aren't sure how they can fit it in when they're already under pressure.
Time is almost universally cited as an issue when I'm speaking to careers leaders or to some head teachers. There is the issue and the challenge of time and the broader pressures that exist within schools and colleges are clearly always there, and I think it would be wrong for me not to accept that and acknowledge that, because it clearly is an important factor. But what we also see with some of the most advanced schools in this and colleges in this area of work is they've found ways to make it fit. They know the importance of the work. I think everybody knows the importance of the mission to improve young people's futures, and it's so important. So I don't hear disagreement over the importance of the work. It's how we make how we find the right way to make it work, and that looks differently within different schools and within different colleges and for different employers as well. But we can learn from really good practice, and that's what we are determined to share more of that good practice to support schools and colleges to make it fit and make it work within their context.
And to wrap up the podcast, if we were looking in another 5 years' time, what would you hope in those 5 years that the Careers and Enterprise Company has helped schools and colleges do? Have you got any goals, any targets that you'd really like to achieve in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so we spoke about work experience and the revolution, if you like, or certainly the evolution of where we've been. I think it is ambitious. I think it is something that is really, really important. All young people have a rich range of experiences that they can gain with employers throughout their time in education. So that's, in 5 years' time, I would want and expect to see far more young people receiving a far broader range of experiences with employers during their time in school. I would want to and expect to see more schools having been found a way to really make careers part of their everyday and integrate it within their broader missions of the institutions. We know that the best schools already do that already, so we kind of want to expand that. And that also looks like enrichment as well being factored in as part of the mission to build essential skills for young people. So young people understanding the essential skills that they need for their futures is something that will take a significant amount of support and effort. We think that careers education is a critical aspect of that. We know enrichment is another aspect of that development as well, and linking those two things together is something that I'm really interested in.
Oh, it's really exciting. Fingers crossed that you can get that. And we like to finish the podcast with a quick fire round of 4 questions. So the first question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge currently facing the education sector?
So there's lots of things that I could say. I think lots of things that people will probably be listening and screaming out, I want this to be said. I think the one that I'm reflecting on a lot at the moment is, and people in the sector are talking about it, belonging a lot, and actually young students feeling as though they belong. We've seen, all sorts of changes over recent years in terms of attendance and engagement with school. Finding the way that every young person in a school can engage, can belong, is something that I think is a really interesting challenge. Is something that will take a lot of effort for us to really move forward with.
And the second question, what motivates you on difficult days?
The idea that we can make a difference to every young person. It's opening the eyes of young people to the futures, to making the most of their potential, is something that continues to inspire me in the way that it did when I first moved into this area.
Third question, what's your proudest achievement in your career so far?
So before I came to the Careers and Enterprise Company, I led a social enterprise that was supporting a few 100,000 young people and adults a year into different employment paths. We made a real difference to the lives of individuals. I personally saw the difference that our work made, and I think growing that impact over a period of time, becoming Ofsted Outstanding as part of that drive, gave me a real sense of achievement.
And the final question, what are you most looking forward to the next academic year?
I think seeing how work experience is going to continue to evolve and develop and have even greater impact is really exciting. Seeing the best practice of schools and colleges across the country is a really motivating part of that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, John. It's such an interesting conversation. And yeah, you've had an amazing impact so far doing the work. So yeah, I can't wait to see what happens moving forward.
Thank you.